of the Roman citizen, not only of the 20th century, but also of the same engineering principles that went in to build the first century Roman wall that you see toward the glass-walled end of the railroad station. Slide, please. When we look at the far reaches of the Roman Empire, and thinking of when it began in the early centuries BC, and how from the basic background of the indigenous tribes of the Etruscans that performed the very beginnings of the Roman Empire in the northern part of Italy, then with the rise of Rome itself, and then with the power of the Roman Empire as it spread all over the continent of Europe into what is now Spain and all over to Asia Minor. This map will give you an idea of not only their land holdings, but if you can imagine how their influence also spread as their land holdings spread from the center around Rome. Slide, please. The Romans themselves were not a very creative lot in artistic senses, although they have produced two major areas in their art that has given us a new sense of building, where I told you the Greeks were stifled by their post and lintel type construction. The Romans developed the arch. Now, we have two different geographical areas. The Greeks had an abundance of stone that they could use. The Romans did not. So the clay brick or clay tile was used in their architectural work. To span these areas that they wanted to cover, they devised the arch system of where the bricks or the stones would be placed within this arch, and it would support a vast covering of space. As I said, the empire spread widely, and some of the first slides that we're going to see are some aqueducts that are in the southern part of France. That this, again, ingenuity of the Roman people, the sort of practicality of moving water from one place to another, but their engineering feats are sort of fantastic. Slide, please. Most of the aqueducts were built of stone, local quarries, not in great quantities around, but enough to build these very long-lasting bridges that supported, that carried the water from the higher mountains down across the plains into the places where it was needed. As you can see in a close-up of this detail, where you would have the column, and then from the top of the column, you would have these wedged pieces of stone that finally, once they complete the arch, wedged into place, do not move, and then the weight can be placed on top of that. Slide, please. Most of the aesthetic side of the Roman culture is borrowed from the Greeks. Where the Greeks were the idealists, the Romans were the pragmatists. They used their things. Their architecture became utilitarian. It functioned the way their lives functioned. Their ideas were brilliant. When something needed, when a need developed, the Roman engineer or architect devised a means for satisfying that need. Like in some of their magnificent social baths, as they were called, these sort of country clubs of the Roman period. They developed these clay terracotta tiles to carry hot water from areas to areas. And certainly when we look at the interiors of the buildings of Pompeii, we can understand how they developed a very gracious and luxurious way of life. Slide, please. Slide, please. This look like a Greek temple. It's based generally on the Greek temple design. This was a carryover from the Greeks, but the Romans adapted it to their own means. They did not have anywhere near the beautiful proportions or the symmetry that the Greeks insisted upon within their architecture. The Greeks might be called eclectic, borrowing from other cultures and assimilating it into their own design. This is the Maison Carrée in Paris, and it's an early 1st century Roman temple. Why do we know it's Roman? Well, first of all, in a subtle way, it does not have the beauty and refinement of any of the Greek temples. Another thing where the Greeks always used a complete porte-cochere, or an overhanging bit, sort of a porch surrounding the gallery of the entire temple. The Romans did not see the need for all this wasted space and brought the interior walls on out, meeting the columns, so that the columns, although they do support some weight, become almost just repetitious decoration that circles around the backside of the temple. You still have the pediment. No need of pedimental sculpture was thought of. And also, we have the use of the Corinthian column. The Romans liked things a little more decorative, a little more fanciful. And although they are considered the realists of the antiquity cultures, they did go into sort of embellishment of design and decoration. The Greeks would have never considered the use of pilasters because they did not perform a function. But with the Romans, they added beauty to the facade of the building, of these sort of sculptured column-looking things that are just sort of reliefs against the sides of the buildings. These are the Corinthian columns, a column structure that's based on an inverted bell shape with a decoration of acanthus leaf patterns. Slide, please. If you can imagine the spread of the Roman Empire as it marched through France over to England, at the same time spreading eastward into Asia Minor, and until finally the whole empire was divided into the eastern and the western divisions, with a second capital set up at Constantinople. Slide, please. And into England, still remnants of Hadrian's Wall that was built as fortifications against the rolling English countryside. Slide, please. And in Verona, the northern part of Italy, an ancient Roman arena. Now these arenas, most of them based on the main one, the Colosseum in Rome, were sort of a feather in the cap of the local generals that controlled different areas. When the empire spread as far as it did, the central source was still, of course, Rome, but with communication, as it was in those days, each little general that was in charge of one of the far-flung areas did have a certain amount of power, still underneath the thumb of Rome. And he would build these arenas to sort of impress the local townspeople or the country people, and would have, even though they were much smaller in scale, would have some of the fights, the battles, the pageantry that went on in Rome to impress the people of the power and might of the Romans. This one's in fair condition today. The exterior walls have been removed, and it allows us to see some of the architectural structure, the combination use of stone in the arch and the columns, with the filling in the massive weight of the wall in brick. Today in Verona, the arena is used for summer operas. One end of the arena is made into a stage, and the people sit around the other sides. Slide, please. It is slightly confusing sometimes when the Romans returned to the Ionic type column. But this would be easily identified because of one thing. seeing the column through an arch. It must be remembered that the Greeks never used the arch principle. Slide, please. Rome, of course, is one of the major cities, and the myth or the traditions or the legends of the founding of Rome, of the twins Romulus and Remus, that were suckled by the wolf, has been depicted many times in statuary. Slide, please. The center of Roman life was the Roman Forum. After the decline of the Roman Empire from about the 2nd century through 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, the Roman Forum went into a terrible decline, that it was sort of the dump heap, the quarry of all the AD Roman buildings. And it wasn't until about the 3rd century AD that the history of the period deemed it important to be saved. For instance, many of the Roman buildings of the 2nd and 3rd centuries were built with marble that was torn from the giant Colosseum in Rome, almost dismantling the structure. Slide, please. The Roman Forum originally was the sort of civic center of the Roman government. And then many of the little businesses were in alleyways that sort of joined, because it was like the town square. Everybody came and joined. There was great milling around. There was great activity within this forum. This is all that's left of it today in modern Rome. But you get a good idea of the general plan and layout of the center of Rome. Slide, please. There was a great bustling around this market square. There was where the Senate was, where the government met, where the temples were, and then in conjunction, the commercial or aspect of Roman society was on the periphery of the large central area. Slide, please. The large arch in the background is the Arch of Titus. It's sort of the entrance to the Roman Forum. Many of these commemorative arches were built to honor a war, a general, a certain event. And it is, they all pretty much follow the same type architectural detail, the massive columns supporting an arch center, and then the massive weight that usually carries some pictorial detail around the top of it. Many times pieces of sculpture were mounted on the top of the large entablature over the arch. Slide, please. The use of the Corinthian column again. Slide, please. And an overall view, and much later, the white building in the background was a monument to Victor Emmanuel, a 19th century addition to the Roman skyline, which is a tremendous monument, also based on Greek or classic lines, even though it is 19th century. And it sort of dominates one of the 7 hills of Rome. Slide, please. One of the triumphant arches, the bas-relief and sculpture decorating it, sort of, we will look at it a little more closely when we see study Roman sculpture. But they're anecdotal. They tell the story of what the arch commemorates. Slide, please. This is a mock-up, one of the movie sets of the Roman Forum, which I think is sort of ironic that the major movie studios now in Rome have to reproduce what once was the grandeur of Rome, probably spending almost as much on a set as the original buildings cost. Slide, please. Looking through the Arch of Titus, we see one of the major constructions of the 1st century Roman buildings, and that is the well-known Colosseum. Many of our football stadiums today are based on this design. The Colosseum is an oval structure in 3 tiers on the outside, and a series of continuing arches that make openings around the entire structure. There was a great labyrinth of passages underneath the field of the Colosseum, and then there was a complete seating arrangement with openings that the people could have access to their seats. Slide, please. This is a massive structure. Actually, it's smaller than when you think. I think our ideas of the Colosseum have been so blown up through our history classes that it's a little disappointing when you actually come into the interior of the Colosseum in Rome. It is really an architectural and engineering feat of the circulatory passageways that circle the outer rings. The traffic structure of the whole building is sort of unique, that it could be easily filled and emptied quickly. And it is of stone and brick construction, with the exterior wall, most of it missing. So what we have left of it, sort of showing how it was finished. Slide, please. Here is a mock-up model of most of the major structures of Rome in its heyday, with the Colosseum in this case dominating this picture. It had the 3 levels and then the upper ring, which was solid, but it had decoration in a way that the Greeks would never use it, because they used all 3 column orders in the pilasters and decorations of the rings circling the Colosseum. Slide, please. As you see in this, its present condition today, just part of the outer ring is still left standing. But as I said, it was used as a stone quarry for most of the buildings of the 2nd and 3rd century Rome. The first level of columns is the Doric. The 2nd ring is Ionic, and the 3rd ring is Corinthian. I can imagine the Greek architects would shudder at the use of this, of all the orders, the lack of consistency that they prided themselves on so much. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. Most of the stories of the Colosseums, of the events and the battles that went on in there, are slightly erroneous. Very seldom did they ever have the gladiators fighted to death, because it just took too much money to train a gladiator. It is thought that possibly some of the sea battles that they had in the Colosseum were held in another one, because of all the labyrinth of things. They couldn't possibly flood the Colosseum to that degree without some leakage. But there is another Colosseum nearby that they know, without the labyrinths underneath, that many times they did flood the interior of the Colosseum, the playing area, and would have mock sea battles within it. Slide, please. The columns in this are purely decoration. They do not support a thing. I mean, the tiny columns, the Doric, the Ionic, and then the Corinthian, in the order of the 3 rings. The main structure is the basis of each arch, and then all the entablature and pilaster decoration is just ornamentation that's stuck on. Slide, please. Here's looking into the center of it. Now, of course, the floor is missing now. But there were all these elaborate structures of passageways, cages, cells, rooms that went all underneath the whole floor of the Colosseum. And at one point, it was entirely covered over with the floor. It was a wooden structure and then dirt piled on top of it. Slide, please. Also, with all the arches showing, it does not give you any idea of what the interior looked like. But one little area has been reconstructed, that little white area over there of marble. And these are just a white facing of marble in sort of a stair-step design. But with the exception of the access entries, the entire surface of the interior of this was covered the same way as that, in stair-step design. Slide, please. Probably our best look at Roman life is from the city of Pompeii. It was a very sophisticated city located in the southern part of Italy, just near Naples, at the very sort of tip end of the boot of Italy. And it was destroyed in 68 AD by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The eruption must have caught the people unaware, because today we have, from cavities they are found in the lava rock, in the dust, animals that were just caught in sort of a frantic pose as either the lava or the lava dust buried them and suffocated them. Whole areas of rooms where supper was laid out or a meal was found intact of all the utensils left out on the table. This was a very active and alive city. It was sort of a suburb-type city of Rome, possibly like a summer retreat is today. But for a very wealthy class of people. There are no slums in Pompeii. Pompeii was not discovered until the middle of the 19th century, so it lay buried for nearly 2,000 years. Waiting for archaeologists to discover it, and they're still uncovering parts of the city and restoring different areas. But it is a very typical sort of suburban Roman-type village or city of a very sophisticated nature. And being so well preserved, with modern archaeology not disturbing any of the results of the findings, we get a great insight as to how the Romans lived, what they used, how their furnishings were, the plans of the house. Obviously what happened on the eruption of Vesuvius, that most of the people being caught unaware were not caught directly in a lava flow, but most of the city was buried in the tremendous amount of volcanic dust that actually just sort of built up tiny layer by layer, as if dribbling sand or salt over an area, that you finally embed the whole thing, and the whole city is just sort of suffocated or snuffed out, and it remained that way for a very long period of time. Slide, please. But we get a good idea of the activities that went on. Of course, all the wood was destroyed, but we sort of know where the pieces went. This was a bakery. Many of the shops, they even had a little area along the street of Pompeii where it was sort of a public scale where you could measure the things to see if the merchants had cheated you. The houses form a definite pattern, many of which are becoming very popular in architecture today. The atrium and the interior courts of the Pompeian houses. Slide, please. For decoration, the Romans devised another method of covering the surfaces of things. In Pompeii, we will see many beautiful fresco wall paintings. But one other thing is what we now call mosaic, which is a typical Roman innovation. Now later on in the Byzantine churches, they developed the use of glass mosaic. The Romans did not use this. They used just different colored natural materials, different colored stones. So you have a much more subtle quality in their pattern and design. In the column immediately in the left of this slide, you will see some very thin little bricks, which we now today call Roman bricks because of their scale and size. It's a very long brick, but very thin. And this was the type of brick they used in construction. Slide, please. We see Vesuvius in the background on a very cloudy day. Slide, please. Slide, please. Probably one of the best examples of a preserved house in Pompeii shows the interior courtyard, or the atrium. Most of the houses are sort of the type we would call a townhouse today. The only yard was in this interior area. The house occupies the whole site, with the front of it coming directly up to the sidewalk or to the street. The streets in Pompeii are quite deep, or I might say the curbs are quite high. They were also used as the gutters, the sewage flow that washed out the city. So on rainy days, these sort of deep troughs were completely filled with water. So to get across the streets, at each intersection, they have stepping stones that are so neatly placed that the wheels of the chariots would go between the stones, and yet you could walk across without getting your feet wet. Within when you enter from the street side, sort of a blank facade of a wall of a Roman house, you enter into a small anteroom. And then from this anteroom, you come out into the atrium, or the large open area. This was usually open to the sky, plantings, gardens, etc. And then the public rooms, what we would call living rooms or dining rooms, and the kitchens, would open directly to the atrium. Then through a passageway, you would go into a separate section of the house, we'll see a plan later on, of where the more private rooms, the sleeping quarters, the servants' quarters, etc., would be away from the public areas. Slide, please. Slide, please. Most of the roofs in Pompeii were of wooden structures, some of them with tiles on top of the roofs. Slide, please. And all that we see left of most of the houses today would be just the walls standing with sort of an open courtyard effect. Slide, please. Again, the bakery. Slide, please. The town was laid out with the major civic area, just as the forum, and then the different streets laid off from that, where the private homes would be. Slide, please. With the size of the homes, most of the families there lived a very gracious life with many servants. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. In this we see the large area. The atrium would be this house actually has two of them, but the large one in front, sort of a colonnaded area, that you would then come into the small garden area that has the columns around it. This is the kitchen area where they did the cooking. Most of the furniture, other than, say, movable chairs, but in the dining area, would be sort of built in. Even the beds were sort of built-in niches into the wall with a stone slab. It must have been very uncomfortable sleeping. Slide, please.